Welcome to Preventing Brand Slaughter, your go-to show for discovering authentic, leading-edge ways to drive employee retention, elevate customer experience, and dominate marketing and sales targets without unknowingly killing your own brand. Tune in to lighthearted, transparent conversations featuring today's leading industry experts and entrepreneurs, breaking down stories of screw-ups, successes, and nuggets of wisdom every business owner or leader should know at heart. Let's get this show started with your hosts, Eric Sims and John Giuliano.
All right, welcome to another episode of Preventing Brand Slaughter, and we've got another special guest today. We've got Russ Long with Long Capture. And Russ, we appreciate having you on the show today. It's great to have you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, man. And we've been looking forward to it quite a bit. So we always, kind of start things off with, outside of just recapping what the show is all about, which is preventing brand slaughter. And it's a pretty big umbrella when you think about what we're talking about, because it's really, most people think of branding. They really think of marketing when they think of branding, right? Because it's like what you say about yourself. But truly what John and I have a passion to dig into is just finding out about the things that different businesses and entities and companies and industries do that they're well intended at times, but sometimes those things just end up backfiring in your face due to maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's lack of experience, maybe it's arrogance. It's a combination of those things that actually damage a brand. So we're trying to prevent that brand slaughter from happening by putting messages out there about different industries, businesses, and cultures that can allow our listeners to learn and grow. So as we kick things off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you? Like, where are you from? What are you about? What's your background a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Russ Long, founder, CEO of Long Capture, originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, so an Okie, and came out to Colorado Springs to attend the Air Force Academy, and really love the mountains. After I graduated, I was in the Air Force, active duty for a couple of years. I was a contracting officer, so a lot of the acquisitions and the purchases and things like that. Everything from janitorial services and buying refrigerators and TVs to, fortunately, at the end, I got to buy launch vehicles to help put satellites in space. That was a little bit more sexy to write home about than arguing over like who was stealing toilet paper out of the janitor's closet. So took that experience in the Air Force and joined the Air Force to see the world. Went to Kansas and New Mexico. That was exciting. Of all the places in the world I got to see, love Colorado. So we moved back here about 5.5 years ago as I started Long Capture. So
nice. What part of Colorado are you in?
So I'm in Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs. Okay. Very good. And so Long Capture, give us a little bit of info and chat us up a little bit about what does Long Capture do? Like, and why did you start Long Capture? So
the federal government just really focuses on sending a lot of money towards small businesses. There's things called set-asides. There's a lot of programs targeting small businesses and tech startups. Very convoluted and confusing to actually work with the government and really frustrating. So I knew there was something there. Almost all of the work that I did when I was in contracting, when I was active duty, was working with small businesses. I see them get in trouble in all kinds of different ways. Couldn't figure out how to invoice. Just didn't understand the contract terms and how to actually be competitive when you were submitting a proposal. Didn't understand lowest price, technically acceptable, all these silly things that the government does. And so I just knew there was a gap there to be filled. And so I didn't have it figured out when I started Long Capture, but really what it's developed into, and we saw a lot of big innovation pushes, kind of starting with the Air Force and moving to other branches as well. So the timing, at the time, it didn't feel great. It took a while to get traction, but there's this whole big movement, and the door really just got kicked open for really cool tech startups and cool just technology companies that have been commercially focused to start having a great kind of front door and on-ramp to work with the Department of Defense. And so that's where we got a lot of our traction. So these days, our focus, more of the short answer, it's working with these commercial tech companies. They've got great traction, maybe solid revenues or a couple rounds of investment on the private side. They've got a good thing going, and they're looking to really diversify their revenue stream, bring their technology into the Department of Defense.
Good.
One more thing I'll say about it that just most people don't understand is like the funny example I always like to give is almost every Air Force base has a golf course. So we got to like maintain the golf course, scheduling. They have gyms for working out, cafeterias for feeding the airmen. So there are like so many different use cases that most companies don't think about.
Right.
So the broad range of technologies and companies that can actually work with the DoD is quite a lot.
That's good. That's one of the first things I was wondering, like, and when I was reading up on it, I was like, well, is the scope really broad, or is this like tied down to only like military type technology that would be used in like, the making of tanks or the making of airplanes or the.
So we're fairly technology agnostic as long as we think again there's a good fit and there's some scale there.
Yeah.
So like technology wearables, like all the different soldiers, airmen, like they have to take fitness tests and meet certain standards. So having fitness programs, even dietary programs, to get people back on track if they're about to get kicked out for not meeting the fitness standards. There are, gosh, it's just all kinds of different use cases. Again, like scheduling apps. We've worked with drone companies that are out doing survey for like construction teams, construction sites, or like perimeter security.
Yeah.
There's a lot of use cases for that within Department of Defense. So it's just artificial intelligence, machine learning, a lot of different software and apps, machine vision, launch vehicles to put satellites in space, the satellites and sensors themselves, solar, just like broad range of technologies. Yeah. Very few actually tied directly to a weapon system. Certainly there's some, but not.
Yeah. That's interesting. I know, John, you had some questions around some of that.
Yeah. No, first I want to say, Russell, thank you for your service. Appreciate what you did for the country a lot. So knowing that you're helping, and that was actually one of my questions was, does the technology have to tie into any military component? You've already answered that one. The second question I have is there a minimum standard that company has to possess before you're able to help them? So I'm assuming they file their article, they incorporate, they have to show some sort of a runway to qualify for a DoD contract. Is that right?
So it's such a broad, there are so many different entry points. There are dozens, not hundreds, of ways to kind of approach government. We have focused on a couple of specific programs. And so when I work with a tech company, I like to see a little bit more of a mature technology. Again, that can be typically indicated by a solid amount of revenue. So 5-10 million plus, or they've gone through like a Series A, already done seed, done Series A, even B or C. So having some solid traction. I'll step back for a second. One of my, I think, biggest lessons learned over the years working with all kinds of different stages of companies. Again, I'm biased. We work with certain programs, but I really like to see companies that have that solid foundation commercially, because then they can actually spend the time, resources, manpower, and know that it can be a little bit of a longer sales cycle, but the upside is huge.
Right.
So if you can really stick with it for 9 months, 12 months to get that initial revenue, and a lot of times we're faster than that, but it might be 75K, maybe $1 million, but they can really stick with it long term, like the 3 to 5 years. That's where you can see the like $20 million buys, the 50 or $100 million or even more. Looking at Andrew pulling down $1 billion contract here and there these days. So to answer your question though, John, is that kind of what you're?
No, that definitely helped. I just think it would be good for the individuals who may be listening who have started a tech company or at a certain milestone. Who would be the ideal individual for you to communicate with?
Yeah, for me, again, a little bit more mature, but no, there's a lot of pathways and like very early stage research and development programs too. National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health. Again, not a lot of places where we play what's called STTR program, Small Business Technology Transfer. So there's a lot of places for companies that are earlier stage. I think the funding cycles tend to be a little bit slower than what you see in venture capital, but it's non-dilutive. And so it depends on how you want to build your company, but there can be some other good routes.
Yeah. So it's possibly more advantageous for a company of, anybody kind of entering the technology space to work with you and the Department of Defense, as opposed to taking that traditional venture route that has been glorified for the past, let's call it 4 years.
Yeah. So again, for us, like we're trying to just take something that's already they've kind of figured out a lot of the different like go to market fit and like these different aspects of the tech. And we're just going to like try and turn up the notch. We're going to try and accelerate. Here's a new revenue stream. Here's a new customer. And with it being more mature, there's a lot of different the government's silly and has like these different buckets of funding and they can't cross, and so then we can pursue multiple different funding buckets essentially. So it really opens the aperture of what we can get after.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you in my experience in this industry alone, working with government entities is basically like learning a whole new language.
Yes.
Like there's different contracting and different points of contact, and an individual with one title in the public sector or private sector is not the same in the government field. So it's literally like learning a whole new language, and you're kind of forced to learn by fire hose, if you
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that where you guys step in quite a bit? I mean, I know there's a lot that you do, but my assumption would be like, let's just assume someone has a great software or technology, right? Like it's proven out, they're doing a good job. They've been selling it, commercially. When you go into contract, and John and I see this a lot in the contact center business because we're in outsourcing. So our business touches a lot of industries, and everybody's language and way they like to lay things out, when they're doing contracting is very different, right? Like if you're talking about an automotive industry versus a software company versus a medical client, right? Like the language and what they require is totally different. So it can be confusing and often even kill deals because people may not be communicating adequately, right? So is that where you guys spend a lot of time too, is saying, hey, listen, because I remember back in my early days of like being a recruiter, right? Like when I would recruit people coming out of the military and I'd look at their resume, they would have all the stuff on there that says, here's the stuff I did. And I'd be like, I don't know what any of that is. And then when you translate it into like corporate language, it would be X, Y, and Z, and it make total sense. So I'm assuming when you go to contract, there's a lot of that takes place.
Yeah, and that's typically where we have to start, and kind of the beginning of the pipeline or the sales funnel, as we kind of help educate. Like we try and do a lot of content and blogs and master classes and webinars, things like that, to kind of help answer a lot of these questions and talk through all of these different programs. But yeah, like in my sales conversations, that's a lot of it is like putting this in plain English. Okay, what do these different phases mean? What do these different rounds mean? What do these different contract types, mean for us? And and try and put that in, real language. Like how does that translate to ARR on the, software industry side? Like what is that based on options? Like what is that? So absolutely spend a lot of time there.
So you mentioned something earlier I thought was interesting because it reminded me of a mistake John and I made very early on and you mentioned about getting into a situation where like maybe the timeline's longer and it's going to be a longer investment to get you there. And if you don't have the revenue or whatever it may be, it's like with us, we got involved with some political programs early on, and we took a huge bath one year because it was a mess and it was something new to us. And we, for us, we barely made it through that. So I'm sure you've seen some of that or helped prevent some of that. To me, that's a huge area of brand slaughter that people don't think of, is like, hey, I'm going after this good thing. We've gotten in this process. High five. And then next thing I know, either I've bid it wrong, it's not priced out where I can make any money, or the process is taking longer. And now I'm out of money before I can even go, or, there's all these different scenarios, I'm sure. Can you share a little bit about what you've seen there and on the good, bad, and ugly?
Yeah. So, and that has really changed my philosophy and kind of like who we target and who we're trying to talk to and bring in. And again, companies that I would have worked with 4 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, I'll say like, hey, I don't think it's right yet. And so some of the things that have happened is like when some of the main programs that we kind of target for this on-ramp to working with the Department of Defense, when it first came out, it was lightning speed. So we went some of the early rounds from like never like thinking about the DoD or like haven't talked to a government customer yet, in like January, to by June, we had a $2 million contract. We'd been through phase one, picked that up, found some customers, and it was just lightning fast. And then, so within a 6-month period, boom, we're at 2 million. This is fantastic. A lot of traction to run with. And that program just has been just all over the place as it kind of grew up and matured. And then we'd have rounds later where they'd come in and maybe pick up a phase one, which is like 50 to 75,000 in this world right away, which is cool. So within like 3 months, maybe. And then we'd wait 14 months for the phase two award, which is like that $1 million to $2 million mark I'm talking about. So we went from like 6 months to 2 million to like 14 months to, million and a half. So like that's where it's been all over the place. These days, it's a little bit more mature and a bit more of a steady state. So we have a better idea on some of those timelines. But still, just the other biggest lesson learned, I'll say, is a lot of companies think they want to do federal or think they want to do DoD. And you get 2-3 months into it and they pull the plug on it. It's like, well, we've wasted a ton of time and resources, burned a lot of relationships because hey, talk to this company, really cool tech, and then they just totally do 180 and walk away from it. So there's a lot of lessons learned there. So like that's really influenced kind of how we're operating today.
Interesting. Now, do you mean the technology company walks away, or do you mean?
Yeah. And again, that's like maybe they're a little bit earlier stage, or maybe they just didn't understand how long the sales cycle would last. And some of that could have been, again, I'll take some ownership, like communication on our part, especially when we came off of these like crazy lightning fast rounds to these stretch out, delayed, plus you throw in COVID that made a bunch of things complicated. Just really stretched out award timelines. And so it went from like, oh, this lightning speed is not going to be the standard. And so that's where there was some disconnect.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really, solid example of brand slaughter, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's
on the Air Force side, it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure it inhibits the ability for that company to ever really entertain the option of getting another DoD contract or even talking to somebody on that side.
Yes. And so I think we're still fortunate that we've got a lot of venture capital interest still. We've got a lot of commercial industry still, but they've definitely strained it and they've definitely turned a lot of people away by kind of just whiplash from these programs. And again, I do think within the last year, honestly, within the last year out of the last 5, it's gotten to more of a steady state where we can at least align expectations going in.
Yeah, so definitely prohibits the growth, not inhibits. But yeah, on top of that, can you talk about brand slaughter? Can you give us maybe a couple of, you don't have to name names if you don't, you can't, but give us some examples of some of the companies you've worked with and maybe some of the most egregious forms of brand slaughter that you've experienced.
Okay, so let's talk. We kind of talked about this before kicking off. So I'll start with like tech startups as my clients, and then kind of the GovCon industry, government contracting industry. Let's see there. I'm doing it. So on the tech startup side, and I think this really goes beyond, like, it isn't limited to just government and government contracts. Where I see startups fail, or where I can kind of at this point kind of predict failure if they don't change it, is when they try and be everything to everyone. They've got, let's say, certain software that really can solve just a bunch of different problems, or like a low code platform, or they're just like, they're doing software development, could be kind of anything to anyone. If you're everything to everyone, you're nothing to no one. So getting them to really focus in on like, well, what is your kind of secret sauce? Like, what is your specific use case, and then competitive advantage or differentiator, And so, but that's where we see, because in the way we approach government, like, we want to hone in on specific problem sets and present, hey, we think you have this problem and here's the solution to that problem. If we aren't able to get that level of detail, like, we just can't ever hook them without a problem. The problem is the hook. And so that's where I see, and I'm talking like, maybe it's a 5-person company, but I've seen companies with like tens of millions of dollars in venture capital investment. And it's like, what do you guys do? It's like, well, a little bit of everything. It's like, but what do you do?
What do you do?
So it's just been like so hard.
Who's your target audience? And they don't. Yeah, we have done a decent amount of work in the software industry and tech industry. One, because it's so hot. Like part of our business is servicing, like the service part of the business, part of it's technology, and part of it's sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the unique things that Leading Edge Connections does is that we have a sales development department where tech companies can come in and basically build out, if they're early cycle, build out their sales team with us versus having to wait or hire or do all that. But the challenge that we've seen is the same thing. We learned this the hard way too, was we'd bring on this client, we'd ask them all the right questions. We feel like we thought,
Yeah.
and then, they'd hire us and we get ready to go. And then, we'd be like, well, okay, we're starting the sales process, targeting this audience. And it's like brick wall. Right. And we're like, well, and then, you learn, like, how many did you sell? Well, we've sold a few of these things to my uncle and my brother and, a couple of cousins. And then you're like, oh, wow. Like, you got a great idea and a great product, but you really don't know who your target audience is. You haven't tested that out yet. You haven't confirmed all these things. And so that's where, and then that, to your point, that lengthens out that first piece where, hey, they get hyper frustrated because everything else in that world, at least up to date, has happened really fast. Like you get your stuff built, funding gets thrown at you really quickly, typically to go. And then you hit this other brick wall that's like, we can't get things moving, and they want to tap out real fast because they don't understand that this is a longer play. And so we've seen a lot of damage that way too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Totally understand. And on our end, like we're trying to kind of help set that target. Because again, they don't speak government. They don't know like the different career fields and like security forces, logistics, maintenance, all these different places where their tech might fit. But before I can go and say this is where it fits, you got to tell me what you can do. And it's not like, oh, well, just customize whatever the customer wants.
Yeah. That sounds like our customer that we used to have, John, that got awarded $100 million as a software company, but they didn't have any software.
There was no
software.
Idea. Yeah, exactly.
Is this a VC investment or?
Yeah. It was
impressive what some of these people get away with.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
We're like, wait a minute, there's actually no software or plan for this software.
How do we vaporware?
Cool. Using a CRM. That's their software.
You're using HubSpot.
Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed on top of all of that is they have an idea of what their ICP is or what it should look like, and then they try to force that to be the everlong target.
Yeah.
When they get into production, they get into sales, and they realize this isn't the target. Really, this is the target, but they're so honed in here, they try to force it. And, it really is kind of the death nail to the business because you're not listening to your audience. You're not really focusing on who your market really is.
Right. But they're going to sell a business plan. Just kidding.
Do you see? So, like, I was just going to see if you see the same thing that we've seen, which has been advantageous for us to a certain extent. It's been challenging too. But one of the things we noticed with like software and the like information technology, all that stuff, is that they're typically product and technology based. They're not service and sales based in understanding, and they struggle in those areas. So. Is that what you've seen too? Is like, hey, really, this is the challenges you've got. Maybe like and nothing against it, like a CTO type guy that's running everything, and they're all honed in on the product, but their ability to really either sell or service after they sell is crippling to them.
So I will say where I spend almost like most of our time, and we really got our start just kind of doing proposals and growing more into like a consulting company. Learned a lot of lessons along the way. But like where we spend most of our time in like proposals and building out like one pagers or marketing materials that we're going to take to targets and government is taking the technical jargon and putting it into like what is the maybe value proposition, but like what is the impact to this customer we're going to talk to or the war fighter that's going to be reading this. Yep. You got to understand their pain point, and then position yourself as like, hey, we're the solution. So one, we understand your problem and can talk to it, and two, like we think we can solve this problem, and that opens the door for the conversation. Then you might get to the point where okay, we can dive in deep to the technology. And very rarely, there's only a couple of places like in the research labs within Air Force and maybe in places like that, where you're going to actually get into the really technical details. And so, yeah, most founders or a lot of these people we're working with, they get excited about the technology, which, they should.
Yep.
But they don't understand that like no one cares that like your algorithm's different because it's like one piece here. Like, what can it do for me?
Yep.
So that's where we spend a lot of time, again, especially on the proposal side, communicating that better.
Yeah.
Does
That's
that sound,
awesome.
I think that's kind of in line with what you're.
Yeah, it is. It's
at.
you're like yours. I think your version's probably even more exaggerated than what we do because you're dealing with government. It's so complex because like literally language and things are they're all speaking English more than likely, but it's not the same English, right? With us, it was very similar. Yeah, they would come in and we're like, they don't understand the pain point. They don't understand the target audience. We're going to come in and we're going to talk. Here's our great widget, right? This is why it's a great widget. And this is the technology about how we created the widget or whatever it is. And then to your point, like everybody looks at it and goes, I don't give a shit. Like, because they don't understand what it does for them. They just think you're blabbing about nonsense as far as they're
maybe
concerned.
The equivalent on your end is maybe you'd see it on their website or their marketing materials. And they're talking about like the nuance, like technical, like deep detail. And it's
John, you know who I'm laughing about, right? I'm not going to say their name. It was one of our very first clients, and it actually tied back into some, they were going after DoD stuff. Remember? Yes, and they couldn't figure that out. I wish I'd known you back then, Russell. Yeah. I would have sent these guys to you because they were. I mean, talk about good guys, guys. Like just. I mean, I would do business with these guys over and over and over again. I felt bad that we couldn't succeed for them when we did, but it came down to that piece was just like we could never get over that hump. Because once you got past, here's what it does, they could never tell us who it was really for or what it would do for them. And we're like, we can't create that for you.
It's gotten to the point in my sales conversations where I will tell them, especially going after some of this earlier stage stuff, like you will be offended and you will be upset with me at how little technical information I'm putting into this proposal. So just be ready. Okay. Like you guys are going to want to put in way more detail and I'm going to tell you, sorry, it doesn't matter. Which is not what you want to hear. And eventually, like we can get into some of those details later on, especially as we get to more scale and more technical customers. Yeah. But like, especially up front, some of these front doors and on-ramps I'm talking about that we use, like absolutely not. Nope, you're going to lose them. They're going to go to sleep. You're not going to get graded well.
It's not going to check their box. Like they got some boxes they need to check. Yeah. John's really good at this in our industry. He does a lot of our RFPs, right? So then, and again, they're different by industry, but he'll be reading me what he's putting down. And I'm like, this is garbage. Nobody's going to buy this. He's like, trust me, it's the box they need to check. And I'm like, but wouldn't they want to hear this? And I'm all salesy about it. And he's like, no, nobody wants to hear that right now. We're going to get to that point later on. So I get it. I think that's an immense value because to your point, and I'm sure this is where you saw the gap. This is what causes an enormous amount of companies just to go belly up. Like they fail because of this. Like they turn and they're done. So it's either work with somebody like you, dumb luck, right? Like I lucked out and got it, or fail. And I mean, we all know that like luck is not, you're not going to get lucky very often, right? Like it's not a good game plan to play with a casino plan to try to get your business up.
Totally agree.
Yeah, cool. Did you have a question, John? Did I interrupt you?
No. That's good. Yeah.
So when you look at, I know it's mostly tech and mostly like, is that mostly software when we're talking technology, or is it a mix of hardware, software?
It's about 50-50. So, I mean, these days, like even the hardware, is just like software enabled. So, it's hard to draw the line, but yeah, so a lot of software.
Gotcha. And anything about like, when you're looking at, well, we didn't touch on, you touched on one side of it. You're going to go back and touch on the other side. I'm not going to let you off the hook with that. Let's get back to what you were talking about.
So the GovCon industry.
The GovCon, let's make sure we give them a fair shake.
Already like an acronym or like throwing this terms around government contracting. So what absolutely drives me like batshit crazy about this industry is that so many of these people, it's like just fear mongering. Do this, you got to do these facility clearances, right, to get your like secret clearance, all these things, or you're going to go to jail, or you got to do these cybersecurity compliance things, or you're going to go to jail or get fined. And it's like, guys, and I see them do it so many times when it's like it's not required yet, or it's a couple years out, and there's this whole perception that like we raise barriers and we like really talk up those problems, because then they're going to need me. And to me, it just scares away. Like, it's already hard enough, especially in my world, to get like new blood into government contracts, like new ideas, new cool technologies. And the last thing we need to be doing is like scaring them all away.
Yeah.
Like, but that's the mentality. And to me, a lot of it's like bottom feeding. They're there and thriving off of the barriers. And like, that's what gives them an excuse to exist, is like, well, we know the regs better than anybody else. So you gotta work with us to stay out of trouble. And it's just such a, I think, poor mentality. Especially like, I feel like we all woke up in the last year with, the Russian invasion, and like, oh, like we got some real threats to pay attention to with Russia and China. And so the last thing we need is for the best technology companies to walk away from working with the Department of Defense, because it's just too damn hard to figure out how to work with them.
Yeah, I always found that interesting, and this is perception, right? I have no way of quantifying it. It's just a thought, but I always had the inclination that it was harder for a U.S. company to work with the U.S. government as opposed to an international company to work with the U.S. government. Again, that's perception. I have no way of quantifying it, but
I'll say in my world, no, that in the small business world especially, there's a lot of programs trying to pull in U.S. owned and operated. So I will gladly say, John, that is not the case in most of my world that I've seen. And I'll say like active duty Air Force side too. So like last 11 years, so on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, that's refreshing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you, so what you're saying is there's a bunch of barriers they put in that, and I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So some of these barriers they put in place to say you have to have this, you have to have that, and if you don't, you could get fined, or you could do.
Yeah.
And you're saying somebody's like feeding off those things. Is it the GovCon, or is it another subcontractor that's like supporting that says, oh, our job within the DoD subcontracting is we evaluate all these people. So they create all the evaluations so that they can, like, we have crap like this in the call center world. Like, it drives me crazy. I'm like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen. Like, you create a certification so that someone else can charge you to certify you that you have their certified garbage, so that you can go give a piece of paper to somebody that it's meaningless in a lot of ways.
So this is government generated, like it's called federal acquisition regulations, thousands and thousands of pages. And a lot of it's around like how you have to compete, quote unquote, requirements, the purchases, the buys. And like once you're on contract, and depends on some of the different situations and contract types and all that, but like there's cybersecurity requirements. You could get to the point where, hey, you need a facility that has been, met all these standards so that you can have, classified information there and store it, and all the rules around it. So the best example I can give is the government started rolling out new cybersecurity requirements. CMMC, whatever the acronyms are. So
CMMC, I remember that one.
Yeah, we know that acronym.
Maturity model, whatever. So what was happening though is like a year before it was even made official, people were trying to charge to audit you to this standard that hadn't even been set yet.
Yes.
Like really pushing to make it happen. And then what actually happened is, towards the end of that year, they got pushed out another year. And they got moved to CMMC 2.0, pushed out another year. So there's but people weren't telling you like, hey, do this in preparation for it. It was like, no, you're going to get got, and like, you're going to get behind, and like, you're going to lose, and you're going to get fined. It's like all this garbage. And it's like, it didn't even come to fruition either. So just be honest, like, hey, like, it is in your best interest. This is a way to start getting a leg up. It's an 80-90% kind of set solution. But just be honest about it, and not just like fear mongering, you're going to get got kind of mentality. That's what I see.
Well, I know that when we've looked at, because we still go in and look at some government RFPs for us, because there's stuff with being in the contact center, or we do some technology stuff too. There's opportunities for us, but because it's not our world, we're not real experienced there as far as, that RFP process is a little bit different.
Yeah.
We've looked at stuff and done exactly what I think you said, which was we look at the list and we're like, oh my, just screw that. That's going to cost us $200,000 or $500,000 just to even get qualified to check the box to fill out the thing to maybe get on the list to, and then we're out all that money. So is what you're saying, and what I'm hearing you say is the first thing you can do is help filter through like what you really need to invest and do to get those boxes checked. And then you can kind of reverse engineer like what all do we have to do and what's it going to cost us and what's the estimated timeline.
So really our whole approach is very different. There's not many that have taken on this kind of mentality. Having been a contracting officer and again worked from that side, like the normal competitive process, the RFP process is awful. It's a grind. It's almost never the best company or technology that wins. It's the people that understand the system.
Yep.
And so our approach is to go after non-competitive, different authorities, different contract vehicles, and working with technology companies helps us get into that kind of world without getting too technical on like the different authorities and the FAR and all that federal acquisition regulations, FAR, all that crap. So our whole approach is like, we want to get the government almost back to kind of a free market where they could just actually have an open conversation because they're terrified to do that. Have an open conversation because you've got this authority to just work directly with them. See who has the best tech, has the best demo, like actually understands your problem, has the right solution for you, and then just work with them. It's a crazy concept, you know. But the government, historically, this old mindset, again, all these regulations push everything away from that. So like that's our unique approach is really trying to get in these non-competitive realms and then push the what's called the requirement, the contract stuff through so we can actually get an award.
Nice.
It seems like a better entry point as opposed to going through the competitive RFP process where
like what you guys are talking about, just like responding to an RFP, like I don't recommend it. Like I don't recommend commercial companies just go and like start responding to these RFPs. I think the margins suck. The evaluation criteria usually sucks. There's been some push away from lowest price technically acceptable, but we still see it a lot. Awful.
In my experience, you always will like the RFPs that always make me chuckle are the ones that are like so specific, they already have the company picked out. Where it's like you have to have a location on Main Street in this zip code. It's like, all right, well,
on the left side of the street headed north. Like it's First name of the owner rhymes with Barry, So that's been our challenge with that too. So if like to kind of put a bow on things, like when you're looking at and you're talking to like our listeners today, who are the type of people, and you touched on this earlier, but I want to make sure we're clear on it. Who are some people that you would say like, hey, if you're this type of business, or if you're in this and you're in this place, reach out to me, give me a call, give me an email, because I think, it'd be a good conversation, at least to be worth your time, worth mine to find out more.
Yeah, I'll say so. At least 5 million in revenue seems to be a pretty good mark. Anywhere north of that is great. We've worked with some companies that got 20, 30, 50 million a year in revenue, and they're like, hey, maybe we should start a new kind of revenue stream. So at least like, hey, you're building it, 5 million in revenue. I'd say probably at least like a Series A, which again varies widely. Sometimes it's 2 million, sometimes it's 50 or something outrageous. Talking about like space industry. So, but I'd say kind of at least Series A, maybe getting closer to Series B. There's some cool matching programs where they'll match investment dollars, things like that. So, but you don't have to have that investment. It's just kind of either or both would be the really, really good kind of starting point.
Okay. And then in the technology lane in some capacity, I guess would be another one, or no?
Yeah, technology, because the authorities, this non-competitive stuff, like we just can't do it in construction and services.
Okay.
Then it's the normal proposal grind that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's what we're stuck in.
Yeah, right. Unless some sort of algorithm, right?
We gotta produce a special, or at least one we can explain to people and tell them we have even before we build it, and that makes enough sense till we get $100 million.
So I heard you proprietary, which is involved in the business, so that's a technology component that we can now spin as being a tech company.
What was it, John? What's the
my hair? It's proprietary technology.
Yeah,
and it's a part of leading edge. So.
There you go.
We're talking.
Good stuff. So when you look at the future, what you guys are going to be, we're talking about who you're servicing now. You're obviously, growing a business, and you have goals of what you'd like to accomplish over the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Can you touch on a little bit about where you're going, and with that, some of the things that you've learned, and maybe committing brand slaughter in your own brand that you're going to not do over the next 5 years?
Let's tie it together. I think the biggest mistake I did setting out was like, I knew I wanted to start a business, and always thought this would be kind of a cool little side hustle, little project, maybe get a couple million in revenue, handful of employees. I'd learn what I wanted to learn, I move on. And so I think I made a lot of mistakes early on in the business, chasing after a lot of other ideas. And to get a little personal, like part of it is like consultants, yuck, right? Like they kind of have like a negative connotation. Like, how do they work? Like, what do they, what do they add value to? And so like, I thought for a long time, like, oh, I need to actually develop a tech or a widget or whatever. And what I realized is like, no, we're helping a ton of people. This problem is so much bigger than I ever imagined. The traction we've been fortunate to have, it's been just so much more than I, again, ever imagined. So kind of over the last couple of years, like coming to terms with that and be like, no, like this is an opportunity to add a tremendous amount of value and help technologies in all kinds of different industries grow. And then that helps them then have impact, So I don't have to be the one building the widget. I can support all these companies, and I do bring a tremendous amount of value doing that. And so like taking ownership of that. And then, so now to answer your question about looking forward, we kind of started as a proposal company. Now we're trying to be very purposeful in who we target that gets pulled into these proposals. Still doing that. So a big piece of what we do, but a lot more of it's kind of the consulting strategy. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of growth there, where I talked about some of the companies we're working with now being, certain tech companies, certain stages like that can continue to expand, move into bigger and bigger companies. Again, as we've matured, we've moved away a little bit of like some of these earlier stage companies. Still near and dear to my heart. I've been there, didn't have the money to pay for experts and stuff. So still could be some ways to go back and support the earlier stage guys that can't afford a team of, we bring BDs, capture and proposal to the team. So all that to say is like first thing and biggest picture is like more and more of this kind of consulting strategy than helping execute your government kind of contracting strategy to really drive revenues, really get into these more interesting, flexible, non-competitive contract vehicles and really scale that up. I think there's just a ton of room for growth there. And just like really big picture down the road being, I don't know, I think we can get to $100 million a year and beyond, and really try and grow something to that scale. And so like, as we are building processes now versus a couple of years ago, actually having that mindset of like, all right, is this going to work with 50 employees? Is this going to work with 100? Mm-hmm. Do we make that trade-off of like, okay, a little bit cheaper now to get us to 50, knowing we're going to have to rework it? Or, maybe this is way more than you wanted, Eric, but that's like,
no, it's good.
What we're working with now is like, hey, there's some serious scale here.
Yeah. These are the challenges that a lot of companies face, right? Because success is great, but it also opens the door for like a lot of challenges. And again, when you look at like the size of your business now and the profitability of it, and then you double that in size or triple that in size, and how do you do that and keep it at a place where, because there's a payment you make to that too, right? Like it's a bigger company, it's a bigger quote headache, or it's more time and more energy. And are the margins going to stay the same? Is the payoff going to stay the same? Am I going to be as happy running a large company? Like that's a question a lot of guys fail to ask. Like we all get in, we're like, oh, we're the biggest company I could make, and blah blah blah, because we're all guys, and we want to conquer the world. And I think a lot of women do that too. I don't mean to be the sexist in saying that, but I'm a guy, so I can only speak for that. But I think when you look at that, there's a trade-off or a payoff that happens at some point in time that says, hey, listen, maybe my business is better off being at 25 employees at a marginal contribution that I make a really good living, and I've got still an enormous amount of freedom over here to live the life that I want because these other things are important to me. Somebody else, it may be like, listen, I love this, but I'm not going to be happy or content until I've got this thing as big as I can push it. And that's my sweet spot.
Yeah, really, like along that note, yes, I think, and that's kind of where it was early on. It's like, oh, we're growing, and just like let me throw everything I can into it. And then what I had to do, again, just to be like real honest, like we are like about half the revenue of what we were at our peak, because what we were doing was not scalable and it was miserable. It was awful. 70, 80 hours a week. Had a lot to learn on the hiring front and the culture front, like all these different pieces. So it was very, very painful. And so like we took a step back and have spent like most of like really the last 3 years really restructuring, figuring out who we are, writing our values down, talking about our culture, pulling that into the hiring process, like all these different pieces. And yeah, you're exactly right. Because I don't want to get to a 50-person company if I'm working 80 hours a week. That defeats the purpose. What do like, oh, I'm making 3 times the money I am now, but like I'm miserable, my health sucks, I don't see my family. Like that defeats the purpose in my book. So you're totally right. Like having an eye towards it. And if I'm going to get to 50, 100, 300 employees, it's got to be where like if I'm working more than 60 hours a week, I've done it wrong. I'm going to have to get out of it. But if I can have that right kind of balance, everyone talks about balance, but like, you know, empower the right people to run the things and make the decisions and make sure I'm purposeful and building them up to be empowered to do that someday. Like that's really key. I'm sorry, I just like soapbox on that, Eric. But
no. I think this gets missed quite a bit when it comes to brand slaughter, especially for growing companies, because there's a lot of things that happen. Like one is I get to be a CEO of a large corporation and I'm married to the way that got us here. And then I become stuck, right? Mm-hmm. Without knowing it, I'm the causation of the brand slaughter because this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we do it. And that's our death rattle, right?
Yep.
And there's the other one that says, and John and I just went through this in the last year where we looked at, we grew really fast and it was great. It was like, hey, high five. But what we realized was like, we compromised some of our identity and who we believed we were and how we wanted the business because we got kind of pushed in a direction and you're moving really fast and it's not intentional. You know, it's like, hey, we thought it was the best thing to do. And then we looked up and we're like, we're doing all this work and we're not making the money that we could have been making or would have been making if we haven't pivoted in these 3 areas that really don't feel even aligned with who we are as an organization. So we've had to peel that back and say, okay, we're going to have to make some changes and revert back, which is painful because you've got to like peel back and people are used to doing things a certain way. And then certain people don't fit in anymore, right? Like there's all these things that happen. But now that we're getting back into that sweet spot, like it's far more enjoyable for us to do what we're doing. I think that's a really huge add to the conversation that you shared, that for the average CEO or the average business owner to say, hey, listen, you know, you really need to take a look at this because if you're not in your lane and and where you feel like you as a person or individual or whatever it is your company needs to be, you're going to commit brand slaughter in some way or form because you're not being true to who you are. Yeah.
Also, on that note, I think we both like said the same thing. And what comes to mind, have you read Ray Dalio's Principles?
Great book.
Yeah, he's got the squiggly, right? Like and so I like it because it's not like it doesn't go up and you don't plateau for a while. You go down. And so like what you just described of like unpacking, like peeling that stuff away. What I had to do is like, oh, whoops. So like we're going down. We got to fix a lot of things, try and make those changes, and then we're gonna go up again. But then we're gonna hit that next point, and maybe it's like kind of a certain mass of like you get to so many employees and processes have to change and systems have to change, whatever it might be. But there's gonna be that downtick again where it's like, oh, whoops, we got to learn from here and keep going. So that's what it makes me think of.
Yep. Very cool. Well, so if our listeners want to get in touch with you, we talked about who would be an ideal candidate for you already, but let's make sure we get some info on here as far as how to get in touch with you and how you'd like them to reach out. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So website, longcapture.com, very active on LinkedIn. So Russell Long, again, Long Capture. And I think those are probably kind of the two best entry points. Connect with us there. And then so on the website, obviously you can submit your email, things like that. Again, we're constantly pumping out content to try and bring down barriers, opposite
Awesome.
of what we talked about in the GovCon industry. So you should get a lot of information so you can help assess, is this right? And like, is this the right starting point for me too?
Awesome. Well, reach out to Russell if it sounds like you're a good fit or even close to a good fit for him. Russell, we appreciate having you on the show. It's been great talking to you, about something that's a little different for John and I as far as industry wise. So it's always interesting to hear how you guys are tackling some of that stuff. And so again, if you want to reach out to Russell, it's Long Capture, Russell Long. And we, like I said, we appreciate having you on the show. Hey, if you like the show, please subscribe, like, share, send it to people. We want to continue to spread the word of preventing brand slaughter. And so we thank you for watching another episode, and tune in next week for the next show. Welcome to the Preventing Brand Slaughter After Show. All right. So, hey, that was a good talk we had with Russ. To be honest with you, I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't know what to expect because of his industry being so unique. And I didn't know much about it. Like, I know there's a ton with DoD government contracting. But I think his niche that he's found within connecting the commercial and government industries for people is pretty awesome. And I thought he had some really great, valid points just on how to help your business be successful, be true to yourself, things like that. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you. I didn't know where the conversation was going to go. I had some ideas in mind, and to be honest, the parallels between the two industries were eye-opening. So yeah, I thought it was a fantastic conversation.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'll be good to get that one out. So I know you had some stuff you wanted to jive in on, because the after show conversation is really, I'll say the first part of the show is the PG family part of the show. The after show is the late night version. Maybe the gloves come off a little bit when we're talking about some of these topics. So there's a lot of shit going on out there like that. And I always lean back propagated towards people to push people in a certain direction. And then maybe because I'm a Gen Xer and we're always looking for the bad guy, and there's always a motive and a hidden agenda. But I think when you look at across the board, it's been a weird year thus far. There's a ton of stuff you can tie to that. But I think if we hone back in on like what brand slaughter is about, which is preventing companies from doing stuff that's going to actually damage their own brand. Yeah. We are in a place in time where organizations are making decisions and running rapidly towards, like a herd of buffalo, towards the cliff to just throw themselves off, is what it feels like. So I know you had some stuff. So you got to touch on what you've seen so far and what you're looking at.
Listen, in times of despair and times of uncertainty, you see all kinds of crap come out of the fold, right? Everybody's trying to come up with the secret sauce on how to fix things. Now we're hearing more and more of companies saying, work at home is dead. We're bringing everybody back to the office, culture this and work ethic this. Let's talk about the culture of an in-person brick and mortar location of a call center, or really any company. You're sitting in a cubicle next to someone else. You're sitting in an office adjacent to someone else. You don't want to be there. I don't give a shit what you could be happy and love your job as much as you want to be. You don't want to be in that building, but you're forced to drink that Kool-Aid to come back into the office. There was an interesting study that was just published from Stanford. They pulled 16,000 workers, okay, over a 9-month period. And what they did is they tracked their satisfaction score, and they also tracked their productivity. And what they've identified is there was a 13% increase in productivity when they were working at home compared to what they were doing inside of the office.
Yeah.
There was a 42% increase in cultural loyalty to the company working at home as opposed to working in the office.
Yeah.
You can't argue statistics. You can make assumptions until the cows come home about what you think and what you feel. Data doesn't lie. So if the data is telling you this and you're telling the data to go screw itself and doing the opposite, shame on you.
Well, I mean, it poses the question. So there are people out there that are highly successful, very influential people who are making some of these claims, right? Are saying, hey, they're basically ignoring those statistics you just read off and saying, this doesn't work. People don't get their work done. They're lazy at home. Everybody needs to come back to the office. So if you look at something, and this has just been my experience, if I look at something and the statistics show me one thing, but yet really intelligent people are saying something else, then it means they're using something else from an informational standpoint to drive their argument. And what I mean by that is, could it be a financial piece? Like I don't listen. If I'm a business owner and I own a building that's 100,000 square feet that I'm paying for, and I'm required to continue to pay for, unless I'm going to turn it into like an Amazon warehouse distribution center because nobody's coming back to it, I may say, hey, this isn't working, because it's not working for me.
Right. I think it has nothing to do. I think there's a financial component. I'm not going to discard that. What I do think, though, is I think it goes back to the previous conversations that we've had on this after show, where executives, C-suite, board of directors, whatever you want to classify them as, they've been in this business for so long that they say, this is the way we've done it. We had to change because of COVID. It is what it is. Yep. COVID's over. We're going back to the way that we did it because this is what I'm comfortable doing as an owner.
Yep.
I don't give a shit what my employees' comfort level is. I'm comfortable managing the staff. I'm comfortable having my thumb on the pulse of what's going on inside of my building. I didn't know for the past few years how things were, but they may have been doing well. Maybe they weren't because they weren't set up for success working remote.
Right.
I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think it has a lot to do with individuals are going to always fall back to who they are and who they are as a leader. And if they're conditioned to, this is the way my business operates and I'm not changing on that, they're going to force people to come back into the building. Go back to, and I encourage everyone to do this, go and take a listen to Mr. Wonderful's Twitter statement he has out. Fantastic. It's like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Him talking about people don't want to go into buildings in these torn cities like New York, San Francisco, LA, Chicago. They don't want to go to work there. They're fearful of their life, let alone just trying to get into a building.
Yeah.
They want to work at home. And if they want to work at home and the data shows you that they're more productive working at home and there's a cultural lift for them working at home. Oh, and as a byproduct, there's a 50% reduction in attrition from working at home. Then what the hell are we doing?
Yeah,
I get it. There are some industries, some businesses where it doesn't work. You can't do it for whatever reason. But for the ones that are doing it, they're not paying attention to the numbers that really matter.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of, well, I mean, you're using data, so it's obviously a fair assessment. But right. I think your assessment of like, this is the way we've always done it. If you just go back to, so we look at the market space we're in, there's a lot of fear mongering, a lot of people. There's legitimately some inflation and stuff going on, right? Like I'm not trying to pretend there's not stuff happening. And when people get, and I know that the companies are scared because I'm watching them run past me and retreat every day.
Yep.
When people get scared, they run back to what they know and where they're comfortable. They run back to their comfort zone, right? People do that. If people do that, then businesses do that because businesses are run by people.
Right.
So you're seeing entities retreat back to their comfort zone out of fear of the unknown of what's taking place in the market space.
Yes.
And so I commend some of these companies that aren't. And I think it's smart. Like these are the times in my mind, like, and I keep telling myself this with our company is like, if we just keep moving forward, you gain so much more ground because everybody's running backward, so your ability to absorb market share is enhanced because you're just trudging along. You may not be able to move forward as fast as in years past.
Yeah. But
you're still moving forward and everybody else is running in retreat.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's happened a lot with that. And we see it happening in a number of different ways, but and again, some of this is economics, right? It's the ebbs and flows of and politics and everything else. But at the end of the day, you're either driving your business or you're allowing the environment to drive your business and not adapting to the changes that are taking place. And I know we've seen this historically, and I think you've got some stuff to even share today on that around it's impacting revenue and it's impacting customer experience. Those two things go hand in hand. it's impacting employee experience. Those three things all go hand in hand. So it may seem trivial to say, well, does it really impact the business that much to move everybody back to the building? But if you're talking about employee satisfaction, we know that employee satisfaction impacts customer experience. We know that customer experience impacts revenue, and we know that revenue impacts your growth, right? And so if I'm saying my revenue's down, but the steps that I'm taking are causing me to have to retreat faster and faster and faster because I'm actually eroding my revenue by the decisions I'm making, you've created this vicious circle of decline. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right, within your own organization at some point. I think you had some stuff to share on that. You had mentioned
yeah. So I all that kind of boils back to the original statement of in times of peril, in times of uncertainty, people, they'll panic, they'll retreat to what they know. There's a good visually that I'm going to pop up right now that kind of touches on some of that stuff. All right. So on the screen right now, what you see is a graph that represents customer satisfaction over the course of the past 23 years. And this is straight from the ACSI. Now, the American Customer Satisfaction Index, they've been out since the 80s. They basically replicated what they did in Europe to track overall customer satisfaction, right? Now, what the hell does that mean for the average person or the average business owner? There's a direct correlation between customer satisfaction and revenue. And we're going to touch on that. So back in the 90s, when businesses really put a focus on customer satisfaction, like when it became kind of that sexy word in the room.
Yeah, that was the hit. It was the new hip thing, right? Yeah,
exactly. You saw revenues climb. Okay. 94 to 97, they were at an all-time high. Like you had everybody jamming.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in 94 to 97? You won't see it here, but if you go back and look, 94 to 97,
Tupac and Biggie were really big. Does that have anything to do with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So 94 to 97, you saw a dip in customer satisfaction take place when revenue was at its height. What happened to revenue after 94 to 97? You can call it a fucking boom or a dot or a bubble burst or whatever you want to call it. The economy took a shit in 2000.
Yep.
As a direct reflection of the poor service that was happening in that peak of where revenue was.
Mm-hmm.
Revenue was up. Everybody was like, great. We're doing everything great. We can start saving money and doing some stuff and not put so much money into customer service anymore or customer satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Revenue fucking tanked 2 years later. And then you enter the early part of this century into the early 2000s. You saw more of a refocus on let's pay attention to the customer again.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? You saw an increase in revenue, an increase in the economy. Everything was going great. 2008 hit because the economy was doing well for the first, let's call it 7 years of the century. They took their foot off the pedal and said, let's make it more efficient. Let's automate shit. Let's not worry so much about customer satisfaction. The economy took a shit again in 2008. Reset. Let's put our attention again to the customer. The economy keeps bubbling up. And now all of a sudden, our economy is taking a shit again. But it's a direct reflection of what we've done over the past few years of not paying attention to customer satisfaction. Yeah. Customer satisfaction right now is you can look at it right here, guys. It's almost at a 20-year low. It's tracking down again.
That's so wild because everybody's talk, if you watch on Instagram and LinkedIn, is like, we're culture focused, we're customer focused, voice of the customer demand. Everybody's saying this, but everything's at an all-time low.
Eric, there's a huge difference between voice of the customer and being customer obsessed and listening to the fucking customer. If you're listening to the customer, you're taking what they tell you and you're making the changes to your business. That's really, following customer satisfaction.
So wait, there's a difference between telling you that I'm customer focused and being customer focused?
100%, because I could tell you till the cows come home. Oh, I'm all about the customer. The customer is telling me that I need to be selling widget A, but fuck them. I'm going to keep selling widget B. But I'm customer focused because I'm listening to them, but I'm not doing anything about it. And that's where the disconnect takes place. I have social media people all over. I've seen it online. I've seen it on the phone calls. I've had clients. I've had past clients. We are customer focused. When you really dig into it, they are not customer focused. They're listening to a customer and not making the changes they need to make to drive the business forward.
I mean, I look at this too, and I go, like, a lot of these dips, I just think about our industry, right? A lot of these, and for those of you who are just tuning in, John and I moonlight as podcast hosts, but we have our own outsourced contact center business. So that we specialize in like CX, customer service, sales, all that stuff. So when I look at when customer satisfaction's lowest, it's also like all this goes together, right? Like it's also when companies start like freaking out, bailing on onshore support to save a buck. Yeah. And they think they're saving a buck, right? Like, so what they're doing is they think they're saving, they look at the hourly wage and say, okay, right now we're paying company A on the onshore $30 an hour. We can go offshore for $10 an hour. We've saved $20. That's it. And they have, if you only look at those two numbers. But the problem is you're looking here, is your revenue's not staying static. Your revenue's dipping dramatically because of these changes, which it's costing you potentially millions on the front end to save thousands on the back end. So and you're netting, it's a net loss, right?
Yeah. And to add on to that, really, you're seeing this dip because during the good times, companies get complacent. They're not doubling down on what got them there. They're getting complacent. And because of that, they're finding ways to make it more efficient, which we all know what the hell that means. It's let's cut costs, let's automate shit, and they're taking the budget from the department that got them there and putting it somewhere else that's not driving the satisfaction of the customer. And because of that, during the good times when they're making these really poor decisions, they're not realizing it's causing the hard times that are going to come. Where if they would have just kept the foot on the gas and focused on that customer satisfaction, it would have propelled them even further.
Yeah.
Instead, they're focused on trying to automate and do other shit.
I still look at stuff and go like, regardless of economic, I mean, barring a total meltdown, so let's just exclude it because that hasn't happened, right? People still spend money when they see the value in spending money, right? So anytime they're not spending money, what they're telling you is I don't see the value in what either your service, your product, or solution is. So when you see a downtick in that, in my mind, it's either your product has become outdated, right? Yeah. There's that possibility, like your product or service has become obsolete or outdated, or to your point, I have pulled away my focus or my attention or my aggression behind sales and service. Yep. Because those are the two things that keep people engaged in that capacity. And I see this all the time. It's like, hey, we're not selling enough. What's your budget for your sales department? And it's nothing, like it's garbage compared to you're paying. You'd rather have a strong legal department than a sales department. And everybody knows that lawyers don't sell anything. They're good for something, but they're not good for selling. And so if you're not going to spend any money on your sales department, how do you sell anything?
Yeah. To add on to what you were touching on earlier, I think it's an important point that needs to be called out here. It's not even just that people stop buying because of your stuff's out of date or whatever you may call it. There's another element that I think gets highly ignored, and that element is the customer feels ignored, and the customer feels like you as a company no longer care about them as a customer. The customer feels that the mission statement and the vision of that organization has shifted and it no longer ties into that individual's core values or beliefs.
Yeah.
And that is a direct reflection of poor customer satisfaction and brand slaughter and not paying attention to what the customer is saying and taking action on it.
So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to start my bus, rev up the engine, and back right over somebody right now, right? So American Express, what once was known as the gold standard, platinum standard, black card standard in service, has done this. They have melted down to like what I'll consider on one level above hot garbage at this point in time, right? And I deal with them a lot. I was one of those guys that grew up like back when I was growing up. American Express was like, even then it was kind of exclusive, right? Like if you had an American Express card, you made it. Like, oh wow, they got Now it's it's not quite that anymore anyway. But that business model they have, but it's the servicing has gone from what I can, and I'm in the customer service business. Like I understand I'm very close to what the expectation is, and then sometimes probably have a little bit higher expectations. But I've gone from working with them as I'm a customer. They're not a client of mine. Love to have them as a client, so we could do a lot of improvements for them.
Yeah.
But I've gone from as a customer having some of the best customer service experiences with them years ago to now some of the most highly frustrated customer experiences with them. And my conclusion is exactly what you just said. They don't give a shit.
Yep.
They've moved in a direction where they've offshored everything, or at least a majority of it. The people I talk to don't have a clue what they're talking about. They can't fix anything. They can't explain anything. And I'm not the richest guy on the planet, but I make a decent living, and what we spend on our American Express card for the company. It's not chump change. So I look at that and go like, hey, like I don't like, how much do we need to be spending to get good service now? Is it just not going to happen? So like you got the airlines, dude, that are at an all time, like it's comical to me at this point in time, not just their call center stuff, like getting on an airplane and, back in the day, or not even back in the day, not too long ago, you get on and the people that were servicing you at the counters and on the planes there was a standard.
Correct.
Because they wanted you to have a certain experience, whether it was Southwest Airlines or whether it was American Airlines or whether it was whoever it was, they had a persona, they had a standard, they had an experience. I fly all of them. The last flight I was on the other day, I think I sent you a picture of what appeared to be the bass player from Metallica, who is our guy in the plane. And it was awful. The plane was dirty. There was food everywhere on the floor. It was late. No one apologized. Couldn't figure out what was going on. It was a disaster. And then when you call in or chat in, you can't get any response. And if you do, it's at best mediocre, right? Yeah. And I don't want to. Don't get me wrong. They have some good employees. I still love these companies. I'm aggravated. I'm talking about it because I picked these couple out because they're ones that I use and I'll continue to use maybe until I find a better solution. But it's aggravating to see a brand go from here to like committing active brand slaughter on a not daily, on a like a second by second basis.
Yeah. And then you have chairman.
Pause. That's me wheeling that bus over them.
No, and then you have the boards of directors of these companies saying, why are revenues down? Because of the economy, because of this. No, it's not because of any of that.
Travel's up.
Right. People still are going places. Revenue is down because you're treating your customers like crap and they no longer feel like that you as a company care about them as a customer.
I'll tell you right now, I would pay more to get treated like I used to get treated by American Express, and I would pay a lot more to fly if I had half the quality of flight that I have or whatever now than I did then, or then.
And I think it's important to highlight what you said earlier, which was I'll stay with them for now until I find a better solution. Because what that tells the businesses is, yeah, we're seeing a decrease, but it's because of this. When that better solution comes out, that decrease is going to be like a free fall cliff.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to spend even more now to try to recapture that market. If you can even recapture it.
Well, yeah, I can't imagine what the spend would be, but to your point, like it's people like, if they're like me, I'm not really your customer anymore. I just don't have any other options.
Right.
So I'm your prisoner.
Yeah. I'm held hostage. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm your prisoner at this point in time, not your customer.
Yep.
And that's how you feel, right? You're like, oh, get on. So I long for the days when this becomes a priority again, because it drives everything. It's the if the focus changes, the finances change. The finances change.
Yep.
Whatever you focus on expands.
Yeah.
If you focus on the fact that it's going bad and you need to cut, you're creating your own problem.
That's
and don't
exactly
get me wrong. There are times where you got to be economically responsible, but to gouge the portion that creates the revenue is not the smart decision to make. There's other areas you can cut more, or that you can look at, how do we automate this, or how do we do something else back here, versus the piece that actually drives the revenue. I mean, I know there's a workforce piece of this too, that like they have challenges, some of them, but
I mean,
I'm
listen,
still not going to buy that.
Look at, in the next after session show we have, I'm going to open up Pandora's box on Samsung. And I can go a whole hour on my experience that I've had with them and the experiences that I've researched and found online about Samsung and their appliances. But to touch on two other businesses that have experienced this firsthand very recently, Target and Budweiser. I mean, that right there, in their mind's eye, they thought that marketing ad for Budweiser was great. They thought that was what they needed to do, and they thought that that's what their customers wanted to hear and see.
Yeah.
I'm taking politics and I'm taking all of personal, anything. I'm removing all of this, and I'm just talking from business to customer.
Yeah.
The response of that customer base was so loud and so hostile that tells you, as the business leader of Budweiser, you don't know who your customer is. You're really not listening to your customer. You're trying to force your customer to buy widget A instead of widget B.
Mm-hmm.
And as a byproduct, obviously, we all know, the economics that came out of that, and now they're trying to backpedal and come back with the Clydesdales and all this other stuff to try.
They'll be fine. Garth Brooks is going to serve all their beers in his new bar in Nashville, so I'm pretty sure everything's going to be okay long term.
Yeah, but the damage that was done is going to be extremely hard to undo. You can't just erase that.
Yep.
And
well,
if
to your point, it's polling your customer and understanding what your customers want, and on the flip side, jamming something down their throat, right, is two different things. And again, this isn't political about what it could have been something. They could have used race cars instead of what they did, right? It's not about that. It's about the fact that it didn't align with their customer base. That's it. Yeah. And you can argue with what their customer base is made up of, and if those are your type of people and not your type of people. But for Budweiser, they were the people that were buying their beer.
Right. Yeah. And I get it. If they wanted to shift their customer base and get a new customer base,
that's different.
That's a whole different ball.
Expand your customer base.
You don't isolate and insult your existing customer base who got you to this level.
Yeah. Well, it's a different, and again, to me, it's a different in being inclusive and saying, hey, we've got this circle. We're going to make the circle bigger, right? To include more people or more customers, versus we got this circle. Now we got this circle. Like, that's kind of what they did, right? Like they shoved their existing people to the side to try to gain another set of, and let's be honest, it's a business. The only reason they care about you is because they can make money off of you.
That's right.
They don't care about your agenda. Your agenda, they thought, could make them more money than their current customer base, and they found out they were wrong. Right? Like it's all monetary. So it was a gamble. It ended up being some brand slaughter on their part. Again, some of these other brands, like we're talking about with some of these airlines and American Express, and people that are saying, hey, listen, we need to save some money. We're going to put our call center stuff and our support stuff over here. We all know it doesn't work. They've done this. I mean, you just pulled a chart out. They do it over and over and over again. Yeah. It's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting something different to happen. But they keep doing it. And then they're like, oh, well, revenue's down, customer service satisfaction's down. Why is that? Well, we moved everything offshore because it would save us $1. It didn't save us some money, we thought, because it cost us more over here. Let's move it back onshore. It's this vicious cycle that we've seen over and over again, versus, hey, let's just figure out a different way to do it. Like we know we need to save some money over here. What if we did something that was in the middle that didn't compromise service? It kept us at service. It lowered costs, but it didn't compromise our service opportunities and our sales opportunities. So
I mean, listen, in our industry, if I'm just touching on contact center and call center stuff, the preconceived notion that most companies have of working with an onshore company, a US based company, is I'm going to spend between $40 and $50 an hour. Right.
Yeah. Now. Yeah.
So, right. So if I'm looking at that saying, okay, I'm going to spend 40 to 50 and I can spend a quarter of that near shore, offshore. I get it. $40 to $50 an hour. That's a hefty price tag. My call out is there are other companies on that are domestic, US based, that are nowhere near that price point that the others are at, the 40 to 50.
But John, then that means I've got to go rewrite those RFPs we were talking about on the show with Russ that don't include Uncle Larry and my other buddy from college who was in my fraternity and the attorney's best friend and their companies. It may open the door to somebody else. And I don't know if I'm willing to do that. Right. Like that's the part of the business that they're still stuck with. Right. And saying like, okay, or maybe I need to reevaluate the companies I'll allow to be qualified to support this. Maybe instead of one, I go with two, right? Maybe, and that creates some more competition inside of there as well, which enhances my customer experience. Like, again, I can have a champion challenger type of situation with this new contract and find two centers. Maybe they're not as big as this one massive one I've been dealing with that's charging me an arm and a leg, and they do it for cheaper, but the quality's still there. I do a champion challenger against those two and move on down the line. But that call, again, this is what I go back to. You're going back now. If you make a decision like that, you're putting the pressure back on different departments versus your sales and servicing department. Now you're putting the pressure on your procurement department, your legal department, your tech department. That's fine. Put the pressure on them. Make them solve the freaking problem, right?
Yeah. And let me ask a question. What happens if I work with a huge company, a huge contact center that has tens of thousands of seats globally, and I come to that big call center with 100 seats, 50 seats, 30 seats, 200 seats? I think it's a big deal because 100 people, in my opinion, as a business owner, is a lot. That call center, they're going to look at it like it's no big deal. You work with a mid-sized player, like you were just talking about, somebody who is going to be more economically in a better place than the large call center from a pricing standpoint. They're going to pour the love and attention to you because those 100 seats mean a lot.
Yeah.
200 seats mean a lot. And
you're a bigger fish.
White glove. Yeah, you're going to get that white glove service that you need and you demand.
Yep.
And you're not going to get the bells and whistles and the dog and pony show of what you traditionally see from a large company that comes in throughout the RFP process, who promises you the world and then 6 months in can't deliver on half.
Yep. So, well, I think that's some good nuggets for. I'm
done for today. I'm
all right. I've gotten off my rant too. I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning, so I'm gonna take a break, refuel. Hence the bags under my eyes. But if you've listened to this, watched this, and enjoyed this, we hope it's been helpful for you. Again, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing it right, and we'll point those out too. Today was one of those days where we just got on a little bit of a rant about some of the people who are maybe more obviously, in our opinion, not doing it the right way right now, and are very capable of doing it the right way. But there are a lot of companies out there that are. So, hey, listen, we hope you like the show. We hope you've enjoyed the information and it's been something that's useful for you and your business. We want you to subscribe, like, and share. Check us out each week. It's an episodic show that we do, and we're passionate about helping companies out there prevent brand slaughter and protect your company, your income, your legacy in the market space out there. I'm Eric Sims with John Giuliano with Preventing Brand Slaughter. Thanks for watching.
That's all for this episode of Preventing Brand Slaughter. We do wish you limitless business success as you perfect new ways of protecting your brand through stellar employee retention, killer customer experience, and unprecedented sales and marketing. Get more valuable advice on brand slaughter prevention that helps you avoid messing up your brand by listening to more exciting discussions at lec4u.com. That's LEC4YOU.com. Never miss another episode, and be sure to get your business-savvy friends to listen as well. We hope to see you on the next one. Thank you for listening.